Okay, so welcome to the Black House. This isn't 106.1 FM. This is the internet. You're here today with Eddie and Nani and very special guest Zalirah Cooper. Who, yeah. Actually, do you want to give yourself a bit of an intro? Because obviously, and then we can kind of jump in from there.
Well, mostly my handle is TheMightyZo. I mostly cover a lot of comic and anime representation, specifically focusing on Black women. And I kind of started this mainly because I realized in a lot of fandom spaces, there wasn't a lot of space for Black women or femmes at all. For the most part, even within a lot of Black nerd spaces, everything was kind of male-centric. And it just felt like no matter which fandom you were in, Black women were always kind of the least common denominator.
Yes.
So I really wanted to make my pages, especially like with TikTok, I really wanted to focus on how we are being represented in media. Since there's a lot of it, but is not nearly enough as other people and not nearly as good as the kind you see other people getting. And the more I actually started doing what I do, the more patterns I started seeing. And it was then that I realized like almost every Black female character fits into a specific category of some form of older stereotype. And I've had a really hard time finding content that really goes out of that barrier because it just felt like the same thing every time. Like if you're looking at comics specifically, you'll notice like most Black female characters are usually killed off, usually put into a coma. And yes, that is also a very common category. And 3, just forgotten entirely. You may not even see these characters for years. And the only time you might see this character is if it's Black History Month, which is the only month where a lot of these studios actually remember that they have these characters. Like they just kind of like go into the files to find them like, oh shoot, we gotta. And it just got really disheartening because it just felt like, your voice isn't really being heard and that you're just kind of often used as like a pawn sometimes when it comes to these things. And then even with the fandom itself, because, you're kind of trapped into this double battle where you're not only battling the actual like company that's making this, but you're also battling the fans of it themselves, because even in this fandom space, you are a minority. The same way you're a minority in society is the same way you're a minority in the own activities that you want to take part in. Because, just like look at the backlash anytime like a character just happens to be Black or they just make a character Black, and it could be the most obscure character possible and there would still be like an intense backlash. Like you really just get attacked just for existing. Which is like also another reason why I made my space, because there's really nowhere safe otherwise to have these civil discussions about it, because you could just be like, hey, I don't really like the way this character was represented. And then next thing you know, like you have all these people just jumping down your throat ready to like, just like, oh, it's not about race. It's not about like, it's just really invalidating. So I just wanted to make my space something more where a lot of other people like me could just speak out and be heard, and we could have these conversations more, because too many times are we just kind of being harassed or just talked over. Like even with like the anime community, like that's a different like beast entirely, because unfortunately you will see a lot more of these ideologies in these fandoms, because a lot of people, they actually cross over from comic spaces into manga spaces because they specifically came to anime because of the lack of diversity. That's the selling point for them, is that there is no like brown people. I'm sure many of you have like seen that tweet of the guy saying that he literally likes anime because it's his escape from Black people. Like when he watches anime, like he doesn't have to think about us or see us. And like you even see it now with like this night skin stuff going on and all these different like stupid things going on. People really overlook just how much the same ideology we see in society literally affects us in fandoms. Like no matter what you like, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, anime, comics, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be there because these are the ideologies that exist within our society. And this is something that I really try to be outspoken about. And I'm not sure if you keep up with a lot of things that recently happened with my page, but I pretty much get dogged on a daily basis for this. Like every time I
Yeah, I've
upload
been
a
seeing.
video, every time I upload a video, I'm just sitting here like having a panic attack over whether or not I'm going to get backlash for it. Even if it's not even something that seems like a big deal, like I still will get like mobbed for it. And this is like I know, and it really just stresses my point that Black women are really like at a loss here, because a lot of the creators who come at me, they're either going to be very racist white commenters, or they're going to be very misogynistic Black commenters. Like, because I've been attacked by about 3 to 5 large Black male pages. They'll send everybody my way. I've been called several slurs by these same pages, basically completely invalidating me. They'll flood my spaces, my comments, basically telling me that nobody cares about these characters. You would get more views if you talk more about Black men. Basically just saying that we don't really matter at all. And that was one of the biggest hits to me, really, because it's like, we're all supposed to kind of be on the same team here, but it really just, you really start to see kind of like that divide where like I remember so many of them, they would even start tagging other Black male creators in my comments, asking them to verify my statements, because apparently me being myself, like apparently what I'm saying isn't valid because I'm a woman, and I'm like, it's a big thing that I have to like deal with continuously. And it gets very tiring because then they keep coming in and sending like all their different people like my way. And so I have to deal with all these stupid comments again and again and again. Like, I remember I was getting called like a like a wannabe white suburban girl, just for saying we don't have to have these hyper masculinity characters all the time. We can have other people in the Black community because that doesn't represent the Black community as a whole. Like, I was getting called like all these different names, like, people calling me a bed wench. And if you know like about that term, it's a very loaded term to call a Black woman. It's just really like nasty stuff. So I'm like, when people try to say like, oh, Black women, like, we experience all these things as a whole, like, no, like our specific oppression is a double oppression of both being Black and a woman, because, you're battling this racism from every other group of people, but then you're also battling the misogyny within our own community. And this is also where you kind of get into the whole Black Sans thing. Because I actually was kind of forced to do a review of him and his work, just because so many people kept telling me to review it. Like, almost all of my videos, people were tagging him. People were like asking me to like review his work. Like, why do you only talk about these other people? Why don't you talk about someone who's doing something for the community? And so I did. I looked into his work. And mind you, I don't just look into people's work. I look into their character, because their character often influences their work. And I didn't like what I saw.
I guess so. Just for a bit of context, like I guess the Black Sans. I guess how would we describe Black Sans? Essentially, it's comic book company. I think it's kind of gotten big through, was it Shark Tank? Was it through? Yeah. So then it kind of was funded through Shark Tank, and I think kind of crowd funded sort of thing. But essentially, the idea behind it was to tell stories about African history in the state, and to kind of mythologize African history in a kind of similar way to, I guess, like you look at, I guess, the ways in which, Avatar: The Last Airbender is kind of this kind of Pan-Asian kind of fantasy kind of narrative.
I can call it Pan-African because it's not.
And I think the thing that kind of comes up with it is its big focus is about Egypt, and it's that kind of using kind of Egyptian mythology as kind of a kind of way to kind of feed that, to kind of create these kind of narratives. Yeah. Would you say that's probably a relatively accurate kind of
Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it, is that, like, because one of the selling points of the work and the site is that it's a very pro-Black sort of thing. Like, it focuses on Black history and, Black artists and Black, well, mind you, the artist is a white man. But the thing is, it only focuses on Egypt, but at the same time, when you're looking into the story itself, there's not actually any real Egyptian culture in the influence of the work. Actually, many North African people and Egyptian people were actually commenting, saying like, "Oh, hey, like this would actually be better if you included some more influences from the actual culture, even like with like some of the uses of the language and different things like that." And he basically told them that they were fake Egyptians and blocked and deleted all of them. And my thing is, as a creator, if you are going to discuss anyone's culture, then the least you could do is listen to the people from that culture. It doesn't really matter how you feel as a person. If you are not from that area, then you do not need to be talking over anyone and profiting off of them. And so that was like kind of the biggest thing for me that just really irked me at first. And then him like, telling all these like different things, like, okay, this is where we come. And this is actually a really big pet peeve for me because for those who are unaware, most African Americans, and that's who he's like really selling this to, is that we descend from West Africa, a lot of West and Central Africa, but nowhere in the series are any of those cultures explored or any of those areas even like talked about. And like, I remember one of his followers was like, "Oh, well, tell me which of those empires were as strong as Egypt." Like, did you not do Google? Did you not even try to Google like anything like Nigeria, Benin, Ghana? Like,
Yeah.
he just got really frustrated.
Yeah, Mali.
Ancient Edo is something. So I have so much to say. I love everything that you're talking about. I went and found your Instagram, and I was like, oh, that's right. This bad bee. She's the one. I remember who I'm dealing with. I have been enjoying your content infinitely. The ironic thing was that for me growing up in Hawaii, which was a predominantly white and Japanese space, anime was where I went to for representation. Like back in like the 90s, like early noughties, that like there was there was Hild and Skuld and Nadia and a whole bunch of other Black female character leads who I was too young to know, oh yeah, these people are like, as I learned from you, like Indian or Middle Eastern is like actually the core root of the like of an amazing number of these characters.
Yeah.
I mean, Nadia herself, I think, is actually supposed to be like some form of Black African, but like more specifically that these, I only ever saw brown-skinned girls having a blast and having superpowers in anime. That was the only place. That was it.
Yeah.
Other than Storm. And so like, okay, cool, here's the 3 berries you get, but most of them come from Japan. So when I started reading your content and like seeing these massive breakdowns of different like ethnicities and like, the impact that anime has had on them, it was really powerful to me. Like, it was really nice to hear somebody else who really cared about these spaces. And I'm also super not surprised that people are jumping down your throat. For the last maybe 10, like near 15 years, rather I should say 10, because I stopped several years ago for very similar reasons that you speak of. I was a professional anime artist. That's what I did. I made like manga and I worked, just that was what I did. But the spaces became, I suppose, more and more drowned by like exactly that kind of, I don't want to see dark-skinned characters, or if I do, I only want to see them fetishized. And please don't give them backstories or humanization. And if I fetishize them, it's not even I think they're pretty. Please give them a sort of derogatory submissive role. And so it's hard operating in these spaces. And it turns out a lot of us, like Black girls in the Black anime community, we're having the same experience disparately. one of the things that like what was really painful too is that because it's almost like there's 1 to 2 slots available for a Black girl in this community, I've also found that within the space of the community, like we fight amongst ourselves for that 1 to 2 spaces that is acceptable numbers of Black people / Black girls.
Yeah.
And I found that to be really painful. Like I've had equally painful experiences with these predominantly white and male spaces that if you are a Black girl, you're kind of like, they're kind of like, there's only so many of us that is allowed to be. Before it starts becoming infighting, even amongst the like, as you say, misogyny on one side, racism on the other side, and infighting and like crab bucketing, like even within our own spaces. So how do you exist and occupy anime spaces somewhere which for me was my safe space at the beginning, which is becoming more and more and more exclusionary, at least as regards the internet, like.
And that's a like really hard thing to tackle, you know, because I have seen a lot of this myself where like people act like there can only be one big like Black creator, but I'm like, no, there's always been space for all of us. It's just that we've been so conditioned to think that we deserve nothing, that we just kind of only support one person. But I'm like, no, it could be all of us all together at the same time.
Wouldn't that be nice? So
like, like if we can just like actually like get it out of the way. It's such a nasty thing to have to kind of keep talking about and keep bringing it up, but people just refuse to listen, like, and actually acknowledge the issues that are going by, because they would rather just like pass it off. Like it's always a constant deflection. Oh, you're just trying to tear down this Black create. Like, no, I'm just saying we can all be here together. Like, it doesn't have to just be one, and not everybody just has to follow that one person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sorry. You can go, Dave.
And I think, like, and I guess like to kind of bring that into that kind of Black Sands kind of space as well. It's always that kind of point of, I guess that's part of the marketing strategy of that, is it's kind of building up this kind of this company as the kind of home of Black comic media, and especially in that kind of space and that kind of that Black multimedia space. And I know, I'm pretty sure actually that's how I found your account in the first place, is that I think it might have been in our comment section on a Black Sands video, and I remember talking, but or maybe it was something discussing. Oh no, it was on through Black Nerd Problems, and it was about Bishop and the casting of Bishop. But I find with the whole Black Sands sort of thing, I find it's the kind of point of, obviously with him, like that's the kind of other aspect of that, and obviously alongside the kind of the narrow, quite definitional, narrow focus of what stories are being told. But the other problem of it is it's a space that he won't confirm as being inherently exclusionary, because and I think
friendly is the term.
And I think like, and it's interesting, like with that kind of idea of like there can only be one, but that's kind of where Black Sands is positioned as being the one. But then you look at something like, I think it's like Kigali Comics, and that's the sort of thing where, again, trying to achieve that kind of same producing comics that are like centered on African and Black stories, but with an inclusive kind of lens.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those points of like I said, but it's that kind of like, I think you said before, like it's that difficulty of trying to find, like if you've got one that's kind of very well marketed, because ultimately that's where Black Sands does very well, as in terms of his type of marketing. But then it's that kind of trying to work out how do we see the range? How do we make sure that the range is seen, and that this isn't the only one that's kind of held up?
And it's really hard to do because, like, you know, as you already know, things like comics and anime, they're very predominantly male spaces. So when it comes to other people's work, it can be hard to actually get that forward, especially in our community where like hyper masculinity is something that's preached on and on and on. So you almost like never really get to see other people's work really shine through, because they want everything to be like about strength. They want everything to be about power. So it's hard when your work really kind of goes against the grain in that regard, because people are so hostile to just those such like even in my video where I reviewed Black Sands, one of my kind of qualms was that, you know, the characters aren't really allowed a lot of emotional range to the point where they don't really have personalities. And I had wondered, like, you know, what's up with this? So I checked out his page, and he responded to a commenter asking, like, you know, will like the main character ever show like emotions and stuff? And he just said no, because like because what was it? He was like, oh, you just want him crying and being feminine. And I was like, how can you compare crying to femininity? Crying is not a feminine trait. And that was just something that had just really pissed me off, because I'm like, you're actually setting us back with these types of things. Because I'm like, you know, we should be already to the point where we are allowed to allow Black people different ranges of emotions, different types of characters outside of just being strong. Many of us are tired of being strong all the time. It's
Sorry. Amen to an extent. Like it's like amen to the extent where I actually feel like a lot of the central traumas that we're facing, while systemic racism really is still a big problem, and like open bigotry, it really is still a problem. The issues I'm meaningfully facing within the space of my community, which is the bit that I care about, is that as I open up and explore myself and develop a greater depth of my own sense of being a person, I'm finding that huge swathes of my personality that I rejected. I thought, oh, I rejected them. But I'm realizing how much of it is like, no, I am attempting to fit in a community, and that community does not accept my rage, my sadness, my depression, my grief, you know, that all of these things. And it's ironic that you end up in very ostracized and queer spaces because those are the spaces that will accept your complete self, because that's what they're basically predicated on, is we will accept your complete self to a point. So like so it is kind of funny. I think however there is almost a part of me who wants to say, like, it's not surprising that given the nature of Black male trauma that there should be such an attachment to strength when there has been such an exact attack on emasculating them. I think that you can actually, like, in a European culture that will either turn you into, you are a predator if you express your rage, or you're emasculated if you don't. A lot of people are like, well, I'm forced to pick one or the other. And I think that what people don't understand is that, like, we would like you to show, what we're looking for is the complete version of you. We're not looking for you to lean too hard towards emasculated or to lean too hard towards masculine. That we're all trying very hard in a very dangerous space to do so, to take off our masks because they're suffocating us.
Yes, and I think one of the biggest problems with some writers is that they're honestly too concerned with white approval. And I don't mean this in like they're doing it consciously.
Yeah.
But I do mean that they, you know, are subconsciously doing this sometimes, where they think they want to like make something that a lot of like white people will see and then get a better understanding. But I'm like, a lot of people just aren't going to understand, and they choose not to understand. So you can't really, like, if you're going to make something, you have to just do it, like, with no regard, like, because like it's like someone for saying, like, what was it, Toni Morrison saying that she writes outside of the white gaze. Basically just like being able to express yourself however you want to, with no regard for how other people outside of the community are going to view it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the funny thing is that, so I grew up here in New Zealand and in Hawaii. I didn't actually grow up in predominantly Black spaces. In fact, there were literally 2 Black families on the island I grew up on, and we were one of them. So I'm quite accustomed to the feeling of what it's like, not to necessarily pander to the white gaze, but simply to grow up and only realize you're Black at some point later on. You know, I feel like people treat me funny. I wonder why that is as a child. And then some point, you know, during your mid-teens to like mid-20s, somebody gives you an education in who you are and why you're like that. And then, you know, that makes it all make sense, and now suddenly you're like you're putting all the pieces together, but you only given the puzzle box like halfway through putting the puzzle together. And I think that when you say that you're paying attention to people's character as much as their content, I think that one of the things I even empathize with is like, we are not given the same footwork as a young white creator or even a young Asian creator, and that a lot of us, whilst I have a lot of issues with the young creators and like what they make, basically similar issues to the one that you have, I also give just a little bit of like room in my head for this person's background, their history, their trauma will come through. It will. There's nothing we can do about that. Like when I read my own works, I hesitate to publish them because I'm like, I can see my trauma, the trauma that was the development of this piece, and I don't know if I want to publish it on grounds that will me sharing my trauma in this format even help. But in the same breath, I'm like, if all of us were to not publish because our trauma would shine through and maybe cause damage, none of our voices would ever be heard, ever. So I feel you, and I feel you completely. I personally haven't reconciled the balance of course, if a Black man of a certain, you know, community publishes a comic, it's gonna be somewhat based on Dragon Ball Z or Naruto or Bleach. Of course, it's gonna have some hyper masculine version of himself reconciling his sense of, helplessness in a world that specifically made him so. And how do I allow that into the space and reconcile that so that I'm giving you the room to work through it?
Yeah, and I feel like that's really just going to come down to like a personal thing, because this is something that you really can't even try to address with him, unfortunately. Because I do see some people have brought it up in comments and stuff, and they just get blocked, or he'll just call you a white supremacist. He actually called me a wannabe white conservative, which was hilarious.
Trying to brand you in with Candace Owens. No, sorry, that's not happening.
And mind you, like, these are other Black people too. Like, and it has been something interesting to view, because he actually did go on live about me, like 2 days ago, saying that I caused like a massive hate bandwagon to come his way. But I'm like, no, this isn't hate, and I didn't cause this. If you look at any of those comments in my videos, these were people who had already been feeling this way, but were too scared to say anything.
Yes.
Because they know how his fan base is, and they know how he is, especially since he is very quick to bring up the fact, like, you know, his Shark Tank and like getting like these like donations from Kevin Hart. Basically, and he'll straight up say like he has the power to like ruin your career and make sure you never work in the comic industry again. Like, and mind you, he's doing this to other Black creators.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of exactly what I mean. And like the problem is that like even though he's not receiving like the reality of misogyny on top of racism, like we get kind of pushed up the tree, right? Like it is hard to occupy places of power as any form of Black person, whether that's like female, male, or anything. And I honestly think those places of power drive us insane because we do not have the support network that it takes. So you have his fan base who are avidly protecting him because he's vocalizing something that they feel they need said. What needs to be, what I would love to see is like more diplomatic people coming between these two spaces, actually forming those unions based off of shared mutual goals. Obviously, you guys, I think it's hilarious that you guys would find yourself in a row because you clearly have shared mutual goals, like absolutely like quite aligned goals of promotion of Black anime material, of of trying to create safe spaces for Black voices to be heard in the anime community. And I think that that shared mutual goal is amazing. Like, yes, please, I'm in. Yes, please, I need this, because I no longer felt safe in those spaces, even as a veteran creator of 10 years. Like, I just stopped feeling safe in those spaces, and I moved away from what I had spent 10 years building, because I did not feel like I could navigate it with someone who could guide me or support me. Mm. And I think that's shit. Not to put too fine a point on it. I will say, like, I still follow Black Sands. I absolutely want to support him. I would love to see him grow. I'd like, there's a tiny part of me is like, you know what? Like, I also like Dragon Ball Z. I feel you, bro. I do think you need to grow, but I don't think it's beyond you.
And that's the thing. There's a lot of space to grow. It's just that he has to get to the point where he is willing to open himself up to criticism and actually listen to the voices of other Black people who may not think the same way.
Yeah. Well, that takes a lot of that in itself is a point of growth that can be quite a hard one to swallow. These people have a personal journey that coincides with their development as creators. And I think that being able to see eye to eye does actually first take making sure that you're not being attacked. And until you know that and the default stance as a Black person is that I feel like I'm being attacked, because the default reality of a Black person is you probably are.
Oh, I'm pretty used to it at this point. Like most of my biggest detractors are usually Black men, which is hilarious. Because I don't think we've gotten to a space where we're willing to actually talk about any of the marginalization within the Black community. Like, you try to bring up like misogynoir, they don't want to talk about that. You try to bring up colorism within the Black community, they don't want to talk about that. Like, it's just constant deflections, like trying to bring up all these other marginalized groups, like even like just talking about like, neurodivergent Black people, like, different things like that. It just gets really difficult and they don't want to actually discuss it. Even like, with the thing with Lizzo that just happened with her saying like, that word, there was a ton of people who were just completely like, okay, who cares? But I'm like, there are literally Black people with this same, ailment who come into this situation that people are just completely overlooking. And I think we actually, sorry.
Sorry, no, sorry, I was interrupting. Please go.
Oh, no, sorry. But I do think that we're long overdue for discussions about intersectionality within our community alone on its own, because, we're so used to like talking about other people and how they're, kind of coming for the community, but we're not actually doing any in-house, taking care of either. Yeah,
I think that so one of the things that you see is that what you're afraid of is the divide and conquer. Like, when we unify under a single banner, we are stronger. It's just that some people are on the bottom of that equation. Black women who, like, we're literally out here getting called leftovers after 35, and like, and we're supposed to be like not only comfortable with that, not only supportive with that, but like allowed to be sacrifices to that goal. In my particular family, I've had a lot of like sisters like pass away, and the general response to that was, like, well, not warm, like, you sort of the illusion that when you die as a Black woman, that somebody's gonna like honor and respect you, and that that before you die they're going to protect you, is just not there. And it's in these spaces which I do more than anything understand are supposed to be escapist spaces, right? We're supposed to be able to shut it off for like 3.5 seconds and like have like, I don't know, like, let me be Sailor Moon for 3 seconds. Oh God, I'm so stressed, right? Like, I
bring this up so much and I actually still get attacked for it, because I'm like, well, why can't we have these little cute little romance stories? Why do we always have to be like, the strongest one there? And I actually had like a few like Black men try to tell me, oh, well, no, because we're not, because you're just trying, you just want Black women to be like white women. You just want this, Black women are stronger than other. I'm like, no, that's not true. We're just like everybody else. Like, this gets really frustrating for me. And this is like my biggest critique with a lot of Black male work, is that they always try to make like this sister soldier character, this strong Black woman who's at the forefront of everything, and she has to carry everybody. And mind you, sometimes even their characters who are little girls, they are still put in this place where they have to uplift the men around them. And I'm like, it shouldn't have to be like that, because that's a lot of that you're putting on us, and you're not actually putting into the actual reality of the fact that it's literally crushing Black women. Like right now, we're seeing some of the largest rates of suicides amongst young Black women, like even before they turn like 21. And this is getting to be a lot like, and like there are a ton of Black girls who want to like be in these spaces. They want to dress like cute. They want to see themselves in these cute little shoujo type, romances. They want to be in that. They want like to see magical girls and stuff. They don't want to be like these warrior Wakanda queens all the time. Like it doesn't have to be this way for everybody. And it's just really sickening that they are not listening to us on this point.
Well, I think that the marriage of the two is like, so you have the fantasy for girls who coming out of the anime community where we grew up on like a mixture of stuff, but a decent percent of the attraction is things like shoujo and adventure and romance and adventure. So here you are and you're like, don't wear pink, don't be girly. Because you're just trying to emulate white. But in my particular case, I'm like, I didn't really grow up with that many white people. I grew up with Japanese people, sweetheart. I speak it fluently. So my emulation, I would even be vulnerable enough to say, like, there was a time where I didn't understand as a child why I was not being accepted into those like Asian spaces because I was too young to know that I wasn't. It wasn't a comparison of myself to white women. It was a comparison to myself to Asian ideals. And so I at first was like, I'll never ever fit into these Asian spaces, right? I won't do it. I'm too big. I'm too masculine. I'm too all these things. Only to sort of then have to push back and, be like, so now I guess I'm super macho. And then only to sort of find myself when I was like, nah, it's a marriage of the two. You want to be hyper macho, so you need me to be somewhat feminine so that you can protect me. But also you want me to be somewhat macho so that you can actually be elevated by my, presence as a woman in your life. These two things aren't mutually exclusive. Like, we just actually need to stop specifically not even stop. I'll backtrack and say, I have found that the more I learn to ignore the criticism, the more good I can just walk forward and do. There's a massive culture of like super criticizing each other within our community and every move that we make. And I think that what a lot of, if I'm speculating, Black Sands fandom will be sending hate your way because they feel that you're criticizing their safe spaces and their expression as a push forward. But what you're still like, but the ironic thing is like, you're coming from a similar space, which is I am criticizing your spaces, but I'm criticizing the way they impact my space, my safe space. So it's like what you need in this point is a diplomat or somebody who knows how to come from both points and marry the two, or at least if not, like create safe boundaries between them. But we don't not have that in our community, but it is not very strong. It's a very weak point of us is those diplomatic, because we end up looking like centrists, and it's like, no, diplomacy and centrism is not the same thing. It is not. Like, it's really not. But we do need it. We need that diplomatic marrying of goals so that we can form stronger bonds as people, as individuals.
Yeah, because I think one of the biggest things was that, like, because we still have to think about things like hierarchy of power in these situations, because, things like these hypermasculine, like alpha male, red pill stuff, it hurts us directly more so than it hurts them. And this is like one of those things that they kind of don't really want to talk about, is all this like projection of this strong Black woman who has to protect everybody. But like, it's not really like, but they don't understand that it's harming us. Like, even, I remember Black Sands did like a criticism of this show. It was called Karma's World. It's about this little Black girl. And in this like one episode, she's kind of crying because she's still kind of learning how to deal with her hair. Yeah. And her mom helps her kind of, through that trauma, like, understanding that she's okay the way that she is. And he basically said that this was wrong because it's teaching Black children to be weak. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, like, no, I feel that. And the ironic thing is there is like, so I'm a mom of a mixed race kid. And I am constantly like horrified to have to navigate her mixed race identity as you know, as a like how do you prepare your Black kids for a world that will tear them asunder if they do not have their eyes wide open, whilst not personally being the one to traumatize them? How do you do that?
Because that's what always comes down to, like in that kind of space of like we talk about, like giving your kids ass whoopings and shit like that, right? That's the core of it. It's just like, well, I'm gonna beat my kids so that they know, so that when they go out in the world, they know that it's like it's harsh, or they know how to be tough, they know how to, and it's like preparation for a world that isn't nice or fair or that sort of thing. Being like, okay, but is there a better way to do that prep than perpetuating like violence and violence and trauma as like a go-to, right?
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to get through because it's something that we kind of just scraped the surface of within the community and experiencing like that generational trauma, because it's like, we are getting to a point where just telling people to be strong and just ignore it is becoming like, no, that's obsolete now because that's not helping anymore. Like, because these kids, because that's not going to help them to actually express this feelings that they're going through. Just being strong isn't enough because like there's only so much someone can carry.
I think that there's actually like several. So so I had 2 centenarian great grandmothers when I was born. And my father is turned 80 this year. So I actually have, in terms of like living memory and spoken memory, like I can go and talk to people who lived before these times. And one of the things that I actually even see is that my grandmother was softer and like more like both my grandmothers were soft and feminine in a way that I think, like they had those like little porcelain, like a box full of those porcelain things and Fabergé eggs, right? Like and they were soft and feminine in a way that I feel like you're not encouraged to be as women in this generation, because you're told that that's a white affectation, except it's not. To the need to be human comes before anything. The need to be feminine in a female spaces comes as a result of the fact that if I'm going to have kids, I'm going to be insanely vulnerable. If you can't handle those sides of me, there's no way I can possibly have children with you. And the need to be masculine comes from the fact that if I'm going to have kids, sometimes I'm going to need to pull up my bootstraps and make it happen and keep them safe myself. So all of these things are a part of the reality of being a person. And I found that in the older generations, especially the really old generations, those things were all present because they were very real, because that was what it was. Here we have the advent of social media, and we're being told who we are through narratives instead of through spoken memory, through grandmothers and great grandmothers and grandfathers. Like we're not getting given those long form human connective narratives from people who were living and survived. And so now you have people who are more inundated with Dragon Ball Z than they are their own internal narrative, like their own, like the realities of the situation as it goes backwards. And so they're like, I want to be hyper masculine like Goku because he never had no problems. I'm like, but Goku's not real. Like, I'm sorry, I know you don't want to hear it. He's not real. Grappler Baki, cool, but he's not real. Like there are things that these things.
And that's another thing too, is that when I address the racism in these shows, because they've attached themselves so much to the actual narration, it's hard to actually talk about the racism because there's like a very intense racism in both of those shows. I would actually argue Baki is like a full-on nationalist show.
No, like
that reminds me,
so one of my all-time favorite animes I had to reconcile with, like I have had several goes of reconciling the very old, very classical Project Eiko and the character of Mari. Like I have had several attempts at reconciling that, none of which stick because Mari is such a little anomaly as a character. I remember feeling like I don't know if you know the character from Project Echo, but if you look her up, she is a Fist of the North Star character with dark skin and pigtails. When I was a little girl, I just laughed. I thought she was funny. I was like, what a funny caricature. And then I grew up to be a 6 foot tall, plus size Black woman. And I was like, oh shit, it's me now. Now I have to reconcile her as not just a character, but like a caricature of myself. And so now, like, I feel like, I guess I'm the joke. And then you're like, okay, well, that can't be the end of it. So now you feel disgusted at the character because it represents a part of yourself that is represented that you now want to repress. And you go through these processes with that. And I went for a very long time where this thing that I grew up on that I loved and this character who I thought was fun and interesting and that I had lighthearted feelings with became a completely frigging complicated narrative for me. And it was no longer an escapist place. And I think that when you're trying to talk about racism, like there's another angle than please don't do this, which is please understand my nuanced and complicated feelings and relationship to this thing. Like just don't. Like, I'm glad that Project Echo exists. I'm all the way back to glad that I exist. I'm really glad that I could watch it. I'm really glad that character was made, and it made me ask some really deep questions about myself. I think that was an accurate portrayal of how a certain demographic of Japanese salarymen saw Black women. And I think that that's painful, but I think that as that narrative evolves and as you have more varied perspectives, that's something that became a conversation between, the creators of this thing and the people who they impacted. As those conversations evolve, you get more nuance, and nuance more than yes, good or bad. I care about nuance.
Eddie, you were saying something?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, the one I was looking at was like and I guess on that kind of idea of that media representation, because I know like that's another kind of big part of like so what I've seen through like of your content is obviously looking at how media come like essentially representations of people in media, but obviously when it comes to casting and that sort of side of things.
I
Honestly, when it comes to these corporations, they're going to try to cut corners in every way that they can. We already know how that operates. But I think it's also about us as the actual like people themselves, like actually being more vocal about it. Because another thing too is that sometimes, not everyone is going to know about the source material. And we are already seeing this kind of divide between like Marvel Comics fans and MCU stands when it comes to the source material versus what is being presented to the public. So it is going to take a lot more of being vocal about these things, but also like trying to get people to understand why this matters so much to the characters.
Yeah.
And also because I'm like, you know, when a lot of people even found out like with the whole America Chavez thing, which I also got people jumping down my throat about still, even though that video was like almost 2 weeks ago. You know, this was a Afro-Boricua character who was just kind of made Mexican and into like a more indigenous Mexican type character. But these are two very different cultures. These things can't just be swapped interchangeably. Same with Scarlet Witch. Like, you know, she was made into some like made up country, some made up European country when she's supposed to be like a Roma Jewish character. And they completely eradicated that from her backstory. It's gone entirely. She's just white now. And it's like, but it was always a pivotal part of her character, and it contributes to what happens with House of M. But a lot of this is taken, and I feel like it actually makes it hard for me to even sympathize with her character now, because now she's just a character who just goes around harming people just because she's in her feelings. Like, see how much like I can't relate to that, because it just kind of gives me Karen energy. I can't. It's a very difficult thing to like really think about. Even with like Moon Knight was a character who strongly like, because I mean like they kind of show little bits of him being Jewish in the background, but they still didn't cast a Jewish actor, and they erased the anti-Semitism that he faced, which contributes to his entire backstory. Because he was a victim of a hate crime, and that was what caused, you know, issues with his DID, but that was erased. And so it's like you can see like there's just a lot of, they don't want to talk about these subjects, but they want to profit off of them at the same time.
Well, I have a question. You know, the sort of relationship between queer narratives and the cleaning thereof for the Chinese media, because like you can't publish queer things in China, like just generally speaking. And so Marvel has a long history of making scenes that are really easy to cut out for the, you know, like for the greater Chinese like population. And I wonder how much of it is them like what your take is and what you would like to see from that relationship of, I'm trying to make money here, but I have to appeal to the LGBT, you know, like Black diaspora. So I'm going to put it in and then I'm going to take it out depending on where we're localizing it to. Like what your take is and what you would like it to be.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be like a really, really touchy one, just because, you know, like even like back when that Star Wars, the new one trilogy came out, like, you know, there was the whole controversy of them removing Finn from the poster in China. And you're also kind of wrapped in this battle of what is going on and what is also maybe xenophobic. Because there's also that to be included as well, because we can't always get into that sometimes. Like we have to remember some stuff is xenophobic, but at the same time, we do also have to understand like a lot of these companies will literally jump for the chance to push back any form of marginalization. And all for the sake of marketability and profitability. And it does seem like they will do their best to try to appeal to every single group. And they're just going to keep doing that, because even with like Miss Marvel, you know, this is a Pakistani Islamic girl, and this received a lot of pushback from both, you know, white people here, but also Hindu nationalists. So then Disney put in another position where they have to like try to talk about things, but also not talk about them at the same time, so that they don't choose a side. And eventually it's going to, these are going to be some really hard things to actually actually talk about, because it's really hard, because this is a mega corporation who wants to make as much money as possible. So they're trying to make everything as clean so that nobody will be offended. But at the same time, somebody is going to be offended.
Large demographics of people will be offended literally no matter what you do.
Yes. It's going to be hard because, you know, that's what they do. It's just going to be one of those things where it's really hard to touch on. Like, I remember Black Panther almost didn't get made because they didn't think that people would want to see something like this. Even with Shang-Chi, like there was pushback with Shang-Chi not getting the promotion it should have gotten. It's so difficult when you're really thinking about it, because, you know, also when you're looking at it from a money perspective, they see things as, okay, the majority is white, the majority is like, you know, this. They look at the majority, they never look at the minority. So they want to see what the maximum profitability is going to be. And they often do cater to where the maximum profitability is going to come from. And this is also something that we have to really think about, being a minority in both the East and the West.
Yes, very much so. Like I like the response, which is just like, nah, look, this is gonna be hard no matter what we do, because I think that really is the truth of it. I suppose. So I create a lot, but I don't publish as much as I create, and I think that there's a twofold reason for that. And one is I often make for the catharsis of creating. And one thing I do actually, like, when I don't have a lot of respect for, I just make art to make money. Making art for money is not necessarily the best route forward. Artists should be able to have money and a reliable industry, but I do think that there's a limit to that because it's not a reliable industry. I make art for myself, and the art that I've made for myself has been insanely healing for me, but not always, rarely palatable for other people.
Yeah.
I believe in making art for yourself, and I believe that when you make art for yourself, no one else should really even be considered, because it's art. That's like its core job. I do actually think that the minute you start to publish, it's who you're publishing to and those spaces that it'll occupy that you have to start taking consideration of its impact for. And I think that the only thing you need to be asking yourself is not even whether or not people like it. It's like, did this thing that I published in this space have the impact I intended to have? Because as an artist, of course, my impact, I'd love it to be to make people happy, to give them catharsis, to have them go through my emotions with me, to find connections and connectivity in the things that I create. And whenever I see, you know, like the argument I feel like a lot of artists will make when they make really toxic, very damaging work is like, back off. This is my creativity. I have to be able to do it. To which my response is, I agree. I think you have to be able to do it. And I think no one should ever have the right to tell you what to make in your safe creative spaces. But I do think the minute you're publishing them so that other people get involved, you have to start to listen. You absolutely have to. That's not a negotiable.
Yeah, because I mean, once it gets to the point where you are representing other groups of people, that's because I'm like, it's one thing to make something for yourself. That's one thing. But if you're actually talking like another community, another group, then you have to be willing to listen and willing. And mind you, like, you know, I was a PhD student. I have my master's. Nobody likes criticism. Like, like nobody wants to hear criticism because you take it as an attack on yourself. But sometimes criticism is good because you can actually learn from it and grow from it. But not everybody is kind of at that space emotionally just yet. Because, you know, you see it as, you know, I worked hard to make this and now you're tearing it down. But but not everyone is trying to tear it down. Some people are genuinely trying to help you, especially like when you're talking about somebody who you don't really know much about. Like, you know, before I started doing what I'm doing, I didn't know like a lot about like the Romani community. I didn't know about a lot of like South Asian communities. It wasn't until I actually started interacting with other people and talking to them and getting a better understanding that I was able to really change the way I think about some things, because you might not know this, but media influences us even subconsciously. So sometimes we end up making characters or thinking about characters from these different groups that we're not a part of from a stereotypical standpoint. And we didn't even realize we did that until we talked to somebody from those groups.
Yeah, very much so.
That reminds me, like, I remember reading, I think it was X Factor, like Pete David's X Factor. And I remember there was a big controversy because then suddenly he was in Eastern Europe. And then, you know, Pete David having written Quicksilver, who's obviously Scarlet Witch's twin. So obviously another Jewish Romani character. And he'd been writing Quicksilver for about 15 years, consistently for about 15 years. And then posted on a blog essentially about something he'd heard from a tour guide saying about how, you know, the Romani people killed children and that sort of thing. And it was that kind of weird moment where he was like, well, I just kind of, and it just, his producer was like, I just repeating what I heard from someone, but it's like, but you've written this character for like 10 plus years, and you just didn't make that click point to go, is this true? Like this, to have that kind of thing of like,
and like the fact that it's not even like talked to anybody.
I don't know if you've ever heard the expression before, but like there was one from the Black community that I actually quite like, which is sometimes you got to let the haters be right. Like let the haters be right. Like sometimes it's worth internal, like, because you talk about like, you know, Quicksilver and like, you know, like killing children. Somebody will come and say something to you in that space. Imagine just like not listening and like writing this like hideous stereotype and being the guy to go down in history with 100 million haters all saying the exact same thing, being like, I guess they're just haters. You know?
And that's another thing too, is like not everyone is a hater. Like they're just literally trying to help you and get you to understand, especially when you're talking about their community. That's the part that gets really frustrating. And that was like, you know, kind of back to like the Black Sands thing. Like you have North African people who are trying to tell you ways to incorporate better depictions of Egyptian culture and the mythology and the language. And then you're just calling them haters and saying that they're fake Egyptians. And like, that's not helping anybody, especially since you're not from Egypt. You don't know anything about Egypt. You can't just make stuff up when you're talking about another culture, and you haven't even researched the history of the area. Like you actually have to do the work when you're doing something that you're not from.
So there's this like concept of like the Hotep revolution within like Black America, right? And it's really funny because like at least in my case, my family were very, very into that at the time. I'm old enough to remember a time where our collective ancestral understanding was incredibly weak because we didn't have DNA testing, didn't know where we came from. So we needed to latch on to a point of power that represented us as closely as we can. And that took roots. So what you have is this like basically, and like nobody's gonna want to hear me say this, weeaboo version of like Egyptians, where we're like totally taking it on the way that otaku took on Japanese culture, where you're like, this is my katana and I am a samurai, but I don't know anything about it, nor do I speak Japanese, right? Like, and so like it's painful to watch as the information unfolds, but then like I do think that there's got to be some exception for the fact that the memo that there is an entire culture. It's a bit cringy if you come from the original culture. There is going to have to be an adaptive period where people actually start to get to know things about like Edo from ancient Benin, not Edo from ancient It's just simply saying like adapting to the beauty of their own culture, because the thing is they did not have it. This is the thing that got them through from point A to point B. And I grew up with that. I grew up underneath like, you know, a lot of Egyptian goddesses and gods, replacing the Christianity that my grandmother had, and then sort of like having to reconcile both sides of me as I'm like, actually, I totally do understand voodoo. Because I looked into it. Actually, I do understand the Egyptian gods because I grew up with it. Actually, I really do love and cherish a lot of the valuable lessons within Christianity because, well, look, it's a part of my culture. Of course I do. And Black Christianity, even separately from white Christianity, you know, like this is valuable to me. It means something. But I also recognize Christianity has some nasty bits. Voodoo has a bad rep, and like, you know, in the Hotep Egyptian gods, there's some cringe stuff going on in there.
I think it's also because, you know, so many Black people across the diaspora are so desperate for finding those roots. They want a culture. They want something that they want to know that they came from something great. Yes. And I think this is a big part of too. They want to like know that there was something just beyond slavery. But it gets to the point where there's a lot of misinformation and not a lot of people are actually doing the research that they need to.
Yeah.
They just kind of take what's ever thrown at them because they just want to hear the good stuff. Because now, even on TikTok, you see like these same people going around telling people we're the original Asians, we're the original Native Americans, like just saying whatever. Like it gets a lot to the point where it's kind of like a lot of confusion. There's a ton of confusion, and I also blame like some other creators, like with Stan Lee, and the Black Panther, and all these other writers who helped with the creation of Black Panther, because it's like with Wakanda, like, which is this fictional African nation, they just mixed in all these different, like, why are the Orishas the same gods amongst characters like Bast, which is an Egyptian god? Like, well, how did you mix all of these things together in this country that's supposed to be in West Africa?
I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, is that I grew up in an environment which did exactly that, which did exactly and precisely that. And I remember in a time where we had like very little connection to exactly where in Africa we came from, that's as close as we could get. And a culture did build around exactly that. And I think that it's worth, like, there's like this great concept in Japanese called chinibyo, which basically translates to like adolescent syndrome, like, and the thing I love about Japan is that they honor the concept that you'll go through this awkward raging hormone phase where you're just like the worst person, and like honoring that developmental stage, which is awkward and petty and tiny minded, as a point that we all kind of went through. And instead of distancing ourselves from it, saying like, oh man, this is cringe, saying, yeah, we had to go through that phase, it's fine, like we'll go through this creative adolescence. And I feel like the Black community is going through something very similarly as regards like Hotep.
Because after that video I made, I had so many of them tagging me in these educational videos, like teaching me about the truth. And it was just like, I could literally just type paragraphs and then post it over a picture, and nobody would like go back and Google it. It's very easy, like, because people just want to hear what they want to hear, but they don't actually care about what's the truth. And it just got very annoying, especially since now other communities of people are finding out what Hoteps are, because this used to be like something that we mainly knew, but now they're finding out and they don't know. So now they think it's the Black community as a whole who thinks this way. And I'm like,
and that's the thing. I remember I got into like an argument on like a history subreddit because it was interesting, because someone must ask a question. It was like, hey, like, I'm looking for some like resources about Egypt, or not Egypt, like Ethiopian and African influences in like Greece and Rome. And then a whole bunch of, the majority of the commenters were like, oh, well, no, only the kind of radical Hotep Black people believe that. We're saying, and it's that weird point, because actually, no, there is a lot of research that probably does suggest to those presences and does suggest to those connections. But it became really difficult. It's really difficult because I found it really difficult saying like, well, I understand, or people talk about, the Nation of Islam and obviously like Yaqub and all that kind of, that kind of mythology that had been created. And it's like, it's a thing of saying, obviously, yes, these aren't factually correct beliefs, but they came from a point in time where they were necessary. And there's a point in time, and part of the thing is, like you said, it's trying to be like, yes, we need to kind of develop past some of these things that are inaccurate and try and get like a more well-rounded sort of thing. But it's really tough now that other communities are tapping into that, because like you said, it means they can paint everyone with that idea, but also it's a really good way to discredit, to discredit like academia in a lot of ways, where we're all, anyone who talks about Black people in Europe is suddenly a crazy Pan-African Hotep.
No, I mean, the interesting thing is that a lot of people who are looking at Egypt as a point of power, like, you can still actually talk about the Nilotes, which are the people who go along the Nile, which go well through Egypt and down further. And they are a people who are distinct as they go from Egypt to like all the way down. And they, in terms of Black Africans, sorry, African Americans, like there's a lot of connection in terms of what you're reaching for there. But people don't know about the Nilots. They don't think about the people who live along the Nile, because that's not something we're educated in as a people generally. And there's many places where our like global, where our greater education is just, it can't reach, it's not reaching them. It's not like we don't have access to that like information, or even have access to people who think like that.
It's very hard to find that sort of stuff that's accessible to the public, which is why like I got really interested in the concept of public history more, because I feel like academia is really made for academics. And that was like my biggest gripe with the PhD, is that, you know, when I was writing my work, they're like, you know, you're writing this for other academics and stuff. I'm like, I don't want my work to be for other academics. I want to be for the people who need to hear it.
Yeah.
You know, I want it to be like, because like they really control the way that you write too. So it has to be like all these superfluous words, all these big things, all different, like something that the average person wouldn't really grasp fully. But I'm like, that doesn't help spread the information in the way that it needs to, because if the people cannot understand it, it's not helping anyone. And that's why I really want it to be more accessible, because like, and then a lot of these articles too, they're trapped behind a paywall.
Yes, very much so. Well, I mean, like the industry that is academia is a real thing, and I think that it's worth understanding that like peer-reviewed research papers by people who themselves were peer-reviewed, that's a good structure. I stand by that. The scientific method is in terms of like actually writing it down and making sure that you can repeat an experiment and that there's like you can triangulate that. That's real. But I also think that there's something to be said for, you can take the scientific and academic approach to anything you like, but sometimes lived experience is just like, shut up, I lived this. You can tell me what you think it's gonna be through as many experts as you like, but I was there.
Yeah, like I remember I was doing this one, I was writing this one thing, and I was talking about like one of the rebellions that had happened in Manchester during the 1970s. It was a huge, like, it was basically a race riot. And I was being told, like, oh, well, you can't like say it like that. You can't just say they were angry. You have to cite these people who said emotional history. I'm like, how do you cite emotion? How do you claim the term emotion? Like that, I mean, just a lot of the, just really making it more and more difficult for anyone who doesn't fit like that academic background. This very like, it makes it, like I said, it makes it hard for marginalized groups to really find their grounding in this work. You have to keep doing all these different things to just silence any form of like, you know, just making it easier, making it more digestible, just saying things as they are. Like if I say, okay, people were facing racism from their neighbors, here's me showing you all the different ways, that should be enough.
Yeah. I think that there is something to be said for like, I like that take. I think that there is something to be said for, instead of doing a reading, but which all history is, I'm sorry, it just is. Like there's a certain amount of storytelling when it comes to history, and you just gotta accept it. I think that there is something to be said for making sure that when you're talking about the emotionality, you are dealing in the quotes and the language that made you think that. But I think that people do actually use white bureaucracy to erase Black people. That's just like white academia to erase Black people, and that's not just I think. That's like, yeah, this is documented. Sorry, like the erasure itself is documented quite well. Thank you very much. So I think that there's a certain amount of like you using the structure and the tools without necessarily ascribing to the culture of people who use the structure and the tools.
Yeah, because it's like, you know, they always talk about like, you know, decolonizing academia, but I haven't seen one bit of that, because if I'm still being forced to talk about Foucault in any shape or sense when I'm talking about Black history, that is a problem. I don't need to be quoting all these different non-Black people in the work if they have nothing to do with what I'm talking about.
Yeah. No, I feel that. I think that you get this terrible thing where as Black people, we are such a disparate people, generally speaking, And we're so used to, especially Black Americans, I shouldn't even say Black people, but Black Americans, you get used to being in positions of subservience. So you have a screaming lack of qualified leaders, you know, like big inverted commas. And so we're always looking for that qualified leader, that ultimately qualified leader. But we've been let off so many cliffs by qualified leaders that we have like a really a tumultuous relationship with that concept as a whole. Lots of us who even are qualified to be leaders are so used to the beheading of the king structure and archetype that we're like, you can't pedestal me. You leave my head out of this.
Because it's like you do get put on a pedestal at some point, and it's a lot of weight to take on when everybody's looking for your opinion on something. They want to know what you think of it, and that's a really scary thing, because it's like it makes you feel like nobody's actually really thinking for themselves, and that everything you say actually really does matter, and that can be a lot of like, even like sometimes I kind of notice this with like some of my like own followers. Sometimes they just want to like know what I think, but I'm like, but it's safe to like, it's okay for you to like express how you feel about it as well. Because like, you know, I actually want you to like, when I like talk about things, I want you to go back and look at it and see for yourself. I want you to make these same, I want you to like actually like view it, see for yourself. I don't want you to just like take my word for it. Just go back and look at it.
Do you ever get this? Sorry, I was just gonna say, do you ever get the experience where like what people are looking for when they look up to you is not so much the truth per se as your truth, because they're looking for a touchstone to build from, rather than they're not like, they don't want a truth, they just want a personality or some sort of form, like fully formed person to touchstone so that they can then start to build from there. Like it's not about the truth. They don't actually want the truth. In fact, they extra don't want the truth. They just need somebody who's firm enough in who they are so that they can start building from that platform.
I do often see that a lot with a lot of other platforms, although sometimes I feel like I'm an insanely honest person when it comes to how I feel and how I think about things when it comes to different shows. Like I've even had disagreements with my own mutuals over certain things, like because there's just a lot of like popular stuff that I don't like. I try not to be an over cynical person, because sometimes it does. It's like, I don't know, when I start to notice these same themes in media, because I feel when you analyze media for a long time and you start to see these same patterns, media becomes a little less entertaining. So I'm like, I can't do it anymore. So then, like, you know, I feel like people are going to feel one way or the other about me personally. So I either have like, you know, the ones who are like full on agree or full on disagree. It's very rare I see anybody in the middle.
Well, okay. So let's, like, hypothetically speaking, if you were in like, if somebody pedestaled you enough to be in charge of your own like publishing platform, like, you know, whether that was something you wanted or not, do you feel like you would be able to actually curate for people in that way, like to actually be able to build and curate different media for, so that it does meet your needs?
I feel like that's kind of a little different because when you actually come into that kind of position, you're not only thinking about yourself anymore, but you do have to take other people into consideration, especially when it comes to publishing, because when it comes to publishing, not everybody has the same desires in terms of what they want to see. You know, as long as it's not like anything like problematic or anything like that, nothing like offensive. But yeah, like, 'cause I mean, you have some people who maybe want, you know, something more horror based. I'm not good with scary stuff. I don't do that. That's not me. I won't engage with it. But, you know,
so
like
I'm not
if it's
able to ask you about Castlevania, then am I?
Castlevania is more tame, but if it's something like, you know, straight up like zombies, gore, all this, I can't do it. But you know, there are people who want to see that. So I'm like, you know, you have to kind of really think about, you know, getting other people involved, talking to other people. Like if that's somebody else's strong suit as a writer or as an artist, I'm going to get them involved and we can talk about that. And then, you know, because people really don't understand just how much of a team effort writing, artistry, all that stuff is, because there are going to be people who are stronger in certain areas than you. You're not going to be strong in every area known to man. That's just impossible. You need other people to really get onto this, because like, and there's just not one opinion on certain things, because there are multiple opinions and they can all be right at the same time. You know, like, you know, there are some people who want to see like more princessy stuff. They want it, but then there are some people who want more action. Like, and all of these things are entirely valid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a long time ago where there was like a model in like one of the first ever like super complexes, like the malls, where they were like, we need stores for each type of person. There's the white American family, and we're trying to appeal to like Tiny Becky, Little Timmy, you know, like John and Mary. And that structure has evolved quite a lot since, but not by as much as you think. And I think that structure, like there's goodness in that structure. Like I do think that there is, like, you know, being seen as an individual demographic is actually what a lot of Black women are asking for. They're like, hi, please see me, like specifically me, you know, look here, you know, like you can say, oh, they just want attention. I'm like, yes, that's a healthy, natural, normal thing for people to want and need. But but the thing is, the people who are curating for us are often people who are the furthest from us. And I think that when I read your, like, you know, the Mighty Zee posts, the thing that I take away is I'm actually seeing that whole structure being internalized and then analyzed and then like given back from your perspective. And I find myself thinking, okay, but if she was in charge of something, I'd watch it. Like, like, if she was in charge of something, like, I would definitely, like, no, because it means that it would be coming through her, whether that's the truth or not. It would be her truth that would care, because her truth actually reflects more my truth as a demographic. And that, what, you know, sure, okay, the Black female dollar tends to go most of all to makeup, but you know, like makeup and education and like our
people, a lot of these companies are so prejudiced that they are willing to actually cut off their own profitability. Like, because like, you know, Black girls watch things too. Black girls play video games. They like comics. They read. They watch anime. They do all this stuff. But you know, we're treated as such a non-factor that a lot of these people don't consider like the actual profitability they could be making.
Well, so I was just going to say, I don't think it's just profitability. I think there's a certain measure of like it's a lack of, like, you'd have to build these structures from scratch is what a lot of these people are thinking. And they're not wrong. We're just saying, invest in that though, please do it. Like, we would like that.
And then see, sometimes it's like, and a lot of them think that they know how to write us, but they won't even, they don't hire any Black women. There's no Black women in the writer's room, no Black female artists, no nothing. So I'm like, and you can really tell, like, it's very obvious, like, and it just gets really frustrating to deal with, because I'm like, it's not hard to just hire Black women. It's not hard to just consult with a Black woman. Like, you can do anything, like test groups, whatever. Like, it's not hard, but they just are so arrogant in the fact that they think that they know us, that they can just like drop in whatever and we'll just take it because we're so desperate for representation. And that's what really gets on my nerves. And because everybody thinks that, and I've had people speak over me about this, because me and like many other Black women with characters like Amber from Invincible, in that show, like, you know, we were talking about, we didn't like the way that the show really treated her, because it's like, you know, even though her points were very valid, she's still treated as somewhat of an antagonist. And her, in the reception she got from the fans were just very vile. And like, it was like, it was very, like, you know, veiled racial bias, but it was there. Like, a lot of it was very racially charged to a point. And like, a lot of us brought this up, but then I had like Black men, I had like, you know, white people, you know, people who aren't directly affected by this, speaking over me and telling me that I'm wrong about the way I'm being represented.
I think like I saw like a commentary of Invincible, and someone was kind of talking about like and it was talking about how a lot of that reaction to Amber, in terms of it's worrying when you look at how fans are going to have to deal with it. You look at the whole narrative of Invincible as a comic.
Yes.
How character people are then going to have to factor in some of the themes and issues and like the complexities and the nuances of issues that come up later in Invincible, even if they're not necessarily directly connected to race in that sort of sense, or like treatment of black women. But it's that kind of thing of like, if this is the backlash that this character's getting, and obviously from a character standpoint, but also obviously from a racial and gender standpoint, that doesn't bode well for like some of the themes that this book is going to deal with later on. Like, and in terms of, I just off the top of my head, like in terms of how it deals with something like sexual assault, which comes up like there's a very, very present part of an arc and later on Invincible. It's saying like, if this is how people react to this now, how is that same fan base going to respond to these things that happen later in the kind of narrative?
That when people try and write for me as a character or even as a demographic, like they're so far off the mark that I'm not even like I don't even relate to it. I don't even have like a criticism, because I'm like, well, you missed. Like you missed by so many miles that I don't relate to it in a way that is relevant to me. I'm not thinking, oh my god, I want to be just like such and such, and I want to go off and cosplay because she's exactly like me. And often when I do find myself in character roles like that, it has nothing to do with me ethnically at all. And certainly not as a female. Like I rarely find even other females or moms or Black characters or marginalized characters expressing their experiences in a way where I'm like, yep, that's exactly how I feel. That's exactly what I went through. I mean, I'm 6'3". I powerlift. I've been quite big before in the past. I honestly find myself connecting to Superman more often. His experiences of being a marginalized alien with way too much power underneath him, like physically, like. But he's another, I mean, Kryptonian, but white guy, and so there's experiences where I'm actually overlapping. Meanwhile, you're trying to connect with me, or at least you're trying to connect with my dollars and cents. And you don't touch the mark.
And it's hard because you can tell that they're trying to write a Black character, but they're not trying to write a character. Like, because you are going to find more of that relatability with a lot of non-Black and, like you said, not even non-female characters, just because they put more effort into writing these other people than they do to writing us as just people like everybody else. And this is something that just is really tiring to see. And that's the thing. Even when you do kind of start to see something more positive, like, okay, I think we're going, no, expect her to die.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Like, oh, cool, she's having a wonderful time. Cool, bury your gays, bury your Blacks, I fridge your girlfriends. Yeah, no, I've really experienced exactly that too. Like, the almost CPTSD shaped wound, which is like trying to empathize with characters who are like me, means that I'll often see hey, this is the one for you, and I almost like reject it out of hand. Like I'll push away from it because like, here you have Invincibles. Why haven't you gone and watched it? It has all this great representation. I'm like, does it though? Like, and it's not. It might do, but I won't watch it because I will just automatically feel like the best representation I can get in media is to make my own.
And some people think that representation just means that they're there.
Yes.
That doesn't mean jack, because quantity does not override quality. You can have as many Black characters in your series as you want, but if they're not well written and they're not good and bad things just happen to them, I don't care about it. Like, you can forget me watching the show entirely. I'm not going to do that.
Have you seen Michiko and Hashin?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. What was your take on that one? Nuanced, I take it.
Yeah. Because I'm like, okay, the art is wonderful. I really do appreciate that it actually takes the time to talk about, like, the issues going on in Brazil with the Afro-Brazilian people and what's going on in the favelas. And it's a very well-written story about, like, dealing with poverty and everybody just trying to survive. And I appreciate the relationship between Michiko and Hachin. Like, they both really grow as characters. But at the same time, like, and I understand its impact in the Black community as, like, one of, like, the first, like, full-on Black anime series with, like, an explicitly Black female protagonist. But at the same time, do we really need another struggle story?
Yeah. Oh, I have been like, you say that you got criticized for you know, your opinions. One of the opinions that I have like most consistently gets backlash is I'm like, do we really need another struggle story? Like, so like I, you know, I was part of a production at one point which was about like marginalized and LGBT characters. And I remember reading the script and being like, this is another struggle story. Like, these people don't like each other. They don't even, they don't just struggle. They also don't like each other the whole way through. And I find myself being like, okay, it's not that that's not realistic, but it's not future sighted. It's not asking, where do we want to be? What do we want to happen? Like, and again, I'll bring up a genre in Japan that I'm quite fond of. I think it's called Ishikai. I can't remember, but it's like the whole, not isekai, but Ishikai, which is the whole concept of a healing work of fiction, like one that is calming, and you know, it's like often very rural. It's often like focuses on cooking and cleaning and like and just like exploring through nature. And you know, even if it's set in a city, it's often about like the connections that you have and the really small moments. And I remember being told stories like that by my grandmothers and my great grandmothers about, oh yeah, when I was your age, I would make pies in the kitchen with my blah blah blah, and we'd have macaroni and cheese. And I would listen to these warm like stories and have them wash over and through me, and I would feel healed by it. So whilst I appreciate the honesty of struggle stories, and a lot of the stories I end up writing end up being that because it's cathartic, I don't like absorbing it. I do not. I prefer not to. I make terrible things. I do not want to absorb terrible things.
Yeah, because I mean, like, we already have to absorb like the real life media that is showing us all these traumatizing things. I don't need to see it in what's supposed to be my entertainment. And that, because it just gets really tiring, because like, you know, in Michiko Tajin, you know, we see several Black characters basically get gunned down. And, you know, even the ending itself is very bittersweet. Like, nobody actually wins. They just kind of learn to just deal with it. And that's where it's like, okay, y'all.
Well, it's exactly that. Iyashikai is what it's called. Iyashikai. And it's the concept as a whole is like, when you come home from a hard day and your cortisol levels are through the roof and you want to sit down with like a cup of tea or a beer or a sweet drink, sit on the couch, and you don't want to watch somebody get torn to shreds. You don't want to watch anybody cry. You don't want to watch anybody have to go through something insanely struggleful. You just want to sit down and watch another human being have a good time. You know, go to a dance hall and like meet a guy. And it's just like, yes, please give me as much Black women just like having a chill time, you know, like maybe working their garden and planting some strawberries and getting them to eat it. Like I don't even care. Like, and I don't think that concept exists in the West as a whole, let alone within the Black community, let alone within the Black female community. But I think we need it. Not want. I think we need it.
Yeah, honestly, I'll be bold enough to even say I think we're one of the groups that really just needs it the most, because it's like everybody just expects us to be their Avengers. Like almost like, no matter what happens, like every group expects Black women to be the ones to like hold them up and fight for them. And it's like, you know, like we can't do that. We can't be everybody's like Superman. Like there's gonna come like to a point where like we need help ourselves, and then nobody's there.
Not to mention the fact that like if you do even so much as like you don't have to, like, we're not fighting anyone, we're just spending 3 seconds on ourselves. And if you do that as a Black woman, you will from every corner be called selfish. You will be treated as if you are a narcissistic, savage-minded, horrible creature, because it goes against the cultural grain to put you first. I, meanwhile, will tell any Black woman who, like, I'm like, please tell me no. Don't say yes to me. Take care of your damn self. Get yourself your nails did. I don't care what it takes. Go get yourself a mani-pedi and don't worry about me. Because I think that's what we need, right? Like we need the ability to take care of ourselves at the very least, and to stop the culture of villainizing people who put themselves first, especially as Black women, especially in our community, especially our energy is just, it's the expression I often use is I've become quite protective of my energy, and I hope that you do the same. And it's just I see that not being the narrative where we're being asked to be strong in all spaces and in all places.
And this becomes like really difficult for me for what I do, because like, you know, I try to be as vocal as possible, especially on TikTok, when I talk about like how, like, you know, I explicitly do my work for Black women. Like I like, you know, people always try to request me talk about all these different things. I'm like, no, I'm doing this for the people that I think really need to hear it. And like mine thing, I'm a Black woman, so that's like the main I can really speak for out of experience. I can't, I mean, I can like vouch for these other people, but I cannot hold up everyone. I cannot speak for everyone. And then it's to like this point where like people get mad at me, almost like making it sound like I'm speaking over people, like I'm trying to erase other people. I'm like, no. And if it really mattered that much to you, then you would do the same thing I did and make a platform where you're talking about your representation. But they don't, it's like everybody just wants other people to do it for them. But I'm like, I cannot take on all these other things on my own. Like I am only one person. And so I'm like, and like I'm choosing to talk specifically about, you know, Black women. Because like I said, this is a group that I come from, and this is a group that I also see being attacked on a daily basis, like whether they're cosplaying, whether they're making art, like, you know, like it really just like everything. Like, and like, so I'm like, I want to make a space where they can just chill, they can be safe here, they can just talk. Like, I don't want to like any of this other stuff. Like, I don't like to really be bothered by all this other stuff. I don't engage in debates because it's not about debates. It's about our experiences. Like, it's very annoying that these types of things keep happening. Anytime I upload anything, like I do not care about other people's opinions. If you are not a Black woman, what you say does not matter to me. I don't like it's really annoying that it just keeps happening. And I keep trying to tell, like, I've set so many boundaries. I've said, hey, this is my space for Black women. I appreciate other people being here and supporting me. But if you cannot listen to anyone here, then you aren't welcome here. I don't want to engage with this. Like, this is not like, I'm not, like I said, I'm not here. I don't care about power scaling. I don't care about debates. I don't care about your opinions on what you think about our representation, because that is not the purpose of my page.
No. I think, well, first off, let me congratulate you for the work that you do. It's really exhausting to weather the storm of the constant criticism. I'm really glad that you are doing that, because the more that people do that, you can actually, like, you can't exhaust anybody from criticizing you, but you can actually normalize your conversation. And I'm so insanely grateful to be in, like, to be moving towards spaces where Black women are becoming more comfortable, like standing up and saying, hey, look, I have a voice. You don't even have to listen to it, but like, don't walk in here and tell us not to talk. Like, it's, you know, don't tell us not to talk about anime. Don't tell us not to talk about media. Don't tell us not to talk about our experiences in terms of marginalization. And I cannot, for every woman who's taking that route, I have nothing but infinite respect. You know, and actually standing in, you know, like as much as you're like, Karening out with Scarlet Witch. I'm like, I actually really want Black women to stand in our feelings. Like, no, sit with your feelings. I know that you've not been allowed to for the last 100 years, but do it anyway.
Like we have to, like, I already have to deal with so much tone policing. Like anytime I'll speak up for myself, I get told like, oh, well, you shouldn't, like, I mean, I know what they said was bad, but you didn't have to say all that to them. Like, yes, I did.
Yes, you did.
I did. Because I'm like, yo, I'm so tired. Because it's like, you know, like anytime you get upset or anything, it's automatically seen as like 3 times worse as the person who was calling you literal slurs. Like, no, like me being angry should be allowed.
And I think that the thing is what's weaponized against us is that when you're angry, that's automatically assumed an act of violence. It is not. anger in itself is not an act of violence. And in fact, the internalization that anger itself is an act of violence is killing Black women. It is killing us on mass numbers. Like, you absolutely not only should be able to be angry in any space where your anger isn't welcome, it means it's a space where your boundaries aren't welcome and you do not need to exist there. Like, if your anger is not welcome, your boundaries aren't welcome. And if your boundaries aren't welcome, get out, go, run. It's not a safe space.
Definitely so.
But I think, well, we've probably gone almost 2 hours now, I think. So.
I'm sorry, I've loved this conversation.
No, it's been really good, and it's been good just to listen in as well. And I think it's been thank you so much for kind of be keen to have a chat with us. So
no worries.
And again, thank you for your work. Like I have been following it since Eddie introduced me to you, and it has been informative and powerful, and it is wonderful to see somebody else in that space. It is a space I abandoned because I felt alone in it. But seeing somebody occupy that space makes me feel more encouraged to go back into that space and start having those conversations.
Definitely so, because like it definitely gets wild out there. That's why I don't even go on Twitter anymore.
I avoided Twitter in the first place. I was just like, my friend keeps being like, yo, you should get a Twitter. I'm like, no. I'm staying away from that.
Twitter's all right. It's not great, but it's all right.
This has been the Blackhouse not on 106.1 FM, but online with the Mighty Zee, Zalirah Cooper. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been Eddie and Nani on the interwebs, and we'll see you guys in studio. This will be up in probably in the next week or so. We'll try and get this video kind of up and on our YouTube channel. But thank you so much for coming on. All right, we'll see you everyone later. Peace.